Okay, Minnesota. So, Minnesota, of course, one of the four teams that got eliminated from the playoffs this weekend, but I think Minnesota suffered the biggest loss out of all four of those teams that got eliminated. Um, they lost 5-1 to the Union. Now, granted, that game was on the road, but still, they really kind of just wimp out of the playoffs, and probably that is one of the worst way to get out and get eliminated from playoff contention. But having said that, I really think Minnesota has been kind of improving so far this season, and it's kind of evidenced by the records they have, which is 11 wins, 3 draws, and 17 losses. 11 wins is actually the same amount of wins they got the whole season last season in their inaugural year, and there's a chance that they are going to surpass that because they're playing the Rapids next and the Galaxy and finish off with oh god, who do they finish off? Can't really think of on top of my head, but there's a chance that they can surpass that win mark, and there's also a chance that they can surpass the points mark because 36 points is also the exact same number of points that they got in the entire inaugural season that they had last season. In terms of goals scored, they have 46 goals scored this year. They have given up 63 goals, so once again, the defense is just an absolute mess for them. But they also score almost the same amount of goals that they have scored last season. I think last season they scored 47, and there's a chance that they can surpass that too. And their goal differential is minus 17, which is a little bit better than last season. Last season was like minus 24 or something like that. In terms of top goals scored, Darwin Quintero, 11 goals leading the chart. Miguel Ibarra with 7 goals. Christian Ramirez with 7, although Ramirez is no longer a Loons player. He's now with LAFC. Ibson with 4, and Angelo Rodriguez, the newly signed DP for Minnesota, so far have scored 3 goals. In terms of the assist chart, once again, Darwin Quintero leads that with 14 assists this year. I mean, that is just incredible how many assists that he has got, and also he is one of few guys this season that has a double in terms of the goal scoring department and also the assist department. Miguel Ibarra with 8, Rasmus Schuler with 4, Ibson with 3, and Francesco Calvo with 3 assists. And in terms of what went wrong for Minnesota this season, well, remember how back in March and in April where I talked about how Minnesota's season was probably finished, even though it just kind of started? Well, that's because they suffer a huge blow to 3 key player that they were hoping to at least play them, or at least hopefully get them to maybe to the next step and maybe challenge for the playoffs. One of them is Sam Cronin, who still suffered from the concussion, and he didn't actually suffer the concussion in the beginning of the season. He suffered it last season, and you don't know if he ever is going to play again. There's been no words of what his return is going to be. And then you got Kevin Molino went down with a torn ACL. And it's the same thing with Ethan Finlay. He also went down with a torn ACL. So basically, your main striker and your main winger has basically blown their ACL. And yeah, I mean, I think instead of me saying early injury to key player, I should say early season injuries to key player. And I think if Minnesota at least have 2 of those, at least have 2 of those 3 players that can potentially still be at the squad, then maybe you would say that they could still be challenging for playoffs and they wouldn't be eliminated right now. Those were just huge losses earlier in the season. And also the other thing that went wrong for them is that they only have 1 win on the road. So basically this season, I've been saying this a lot about Minnesota, and that is for some reason when they are at home at TCF Bank Stadium, they just look like the best team in the league. But when they go on the road, they just look like the worst team in the league. I mean, I just don't understand why do they do so badly on the road. Like last season, I know they were bad on the road too, but they weren't. They did get like a couple of wins last season on the road too, and this season it's been a pretty shit show for them to only get one win this season on the road. And then of course, the other problem that they had and what went wrong for them is the midfield and the defense. I mean, we said it last season of how their midfield is not very good and their defense is even worse. I mean, their defense is pretty much like a USL level kind of defense, and it's once again shown in this year where they're just conceding just really silly goals, and why their goal allow mark is almost exactly the same as it was last season. And also in part of the games they get overrun in the midfield. And most of those games I think they got overrun in the midfield were on the road, which also explains why they only have one win this season on the road. But in terms of what went right, and speaking of them looking like the worst team on the road, for whatever reason at home, they look like the best team in the league. I mean, TCF Bank Stadium is just an absolute fortress, and I'm guessing maybe it's a fortress because of the fact that Minnesota has turf in their stadium. And what's weird about the stadium is that you got the Minnesota Gopher logo in the center circle, and then you also have the letter where the touchdown line is supposed to be. It's almost like a football stadium that they're playing in, but they never erase those kind of marks. It's just still there, and maybe that might be the reason why it's kind of confusing to some opponent. But whatever it is, they were incredibly good at home. I mean, they didn't just beat easy team at home. They beat the likes of NYCFC, LAFC, Portland, and also who was another team that they also beat? TFC. Although TFC weren't really good this season, these are still pretty decent team that they beat. And I think probably the most impressive out of those bunch was that LAFC game where they won 5-1. I mean, I know in that game LAFC did not start a lot of starters in that game, but to win 5-1 against LAFC, and when LAFC this season has been having a good year, that is definitely unexpected, and that was probably one of the biggest shock of all the shock kind of upset games that we had this season. And then of course, the other thing that they went right for this season is that they finally signed a DP. In fact, 2 DP that they signed, but the first DP is probably the most important one, because the first DP currently is the top goal scorer for this team and also the assist leader. I mean, getting Darwin Quintero it was a huge impact to this team, and you immediately saw the impact when he was with this team, and he just kind of made this team so much better than what they were. Because remember, Minnesota was really struggling early part of the season, and it looked like after those killer injury to Molino and also Finley, that you would think that they're gonna just have as bad of a season as last season. But ever since Quintero was put into that squad, it just gave more belief on this team, and he just made this team look so much better. And in other words, he pretty much just carried this team on his back, and is the reason why they had so many good performance this season, more than I think they probably did last season. And the other thing is that even with the injury, they looked like they were competing for the playoffs, and that is true. I mean, this team for part of the season was actually above the red line. And I think last season, there was no part of the season that Minnesota was above the red line. Minnesota never find themselves even came close to compete from the playoffs. And this season, they were there. Like, they were just hovering around. They were just sticking around to potentially make the playoffs. And I even think that at one point, I even said that maybe this team will definitely make the playoffs. But unfortunately, they had 5 straight road games. And you know how I said that they don't do well on the road. And the fact that when they play against the Sounders. They lost that game, and that was the game that I thought if they don't win that game, then they are really screwed. And it turns out that game was pretty much the final nail in the coffin for Minnesota, because after that, they pretty much just collapsed because they were on the road, and since they just cannot win on the road, that of course it was pretty obvious that they were out of playoff contention. But still, even with those key injuries, and they were definitely in it for most point, and that is probably one of the biggest reasons why I think this team has improved this season, with the fact that they were at least competing, unlike last season when they were at no point in the season competing whatsoever. I mean, they spent more time last season being the spoiler than actually competing from getting themselves above the red line and potentially get themselves into the playoffs. But yeah, moving forward for this team, well, the biggest thing moving forward for them is that they're now getting the new stadium. I also have heard that in their last game at TCF Bank Stadium, they are going to open the upper deck, which means that there's going to be 50,000 fans in that game. And knowing how TCF Bank Stadium has been such a fortress, and how Minnesota fan tends to pack that place for most of the matches, 50,000 people, that is just going to be amazing. And that, that is going to be a game that, they could potentially win. And they're playing LA Galaxy in that game, and that game is going to be huge for Minnesota and the Galaxy, because for Minnesota, they have a chance to do what they did last season, which is play that spoiler road, and for the Galaxy, they have to win that game if they want to keep their playoff hope alive, although they have to face in a hostile environment. And also, I kind of just got a little bit off track in terms of talking about the playoff scenario, but they still have a chance to play the spoiler role, and next season, they do move into Allianz Field or Allianz Stadium. I think it's Allianz Field, and I'll tell you what, that stadium looked absolutely amazing, and I am already thinking about potentially going to Minneapolis next season and go and visit that stadium because it looked absolutely gorgeous. The other thing about this team moving forward is that they will have to sign that third DP. And I think that third DP has to be in the defense. This team, I really think, are pretty good going forward on the attack. I mean, they already have Quintero, Ibarra, and they're going to get Molino and Finley back next season, and maybe Sam Cronin in that midfield and anchoring that defensive mid. So their attack and sort of their midfield is good. What is not good is the defense. And despite the fact that they still do have Francesco Calvo there, which, Calvo is not having a good season whatsoever. I mean, last season I think he was pretty decent and he tried his best to trying to anchor that defense. This season, it's kind of the complete opposite. I mean, he's been having some bad performance. He also got a couple of sending off this season. So yeah, Francesco Calvo is really supposed to be the only kind of legitimately good defender on that team, and he's not even having a good season too. So they need to sign some defender. They need a DP level defense. If they don't get some defenders and some midfielder, then this is just going to continue. It doesn't matter how good their attack is going to be. Their defense is always going to be their biggest downfall if they don't not fix it. And then finally, the ownership's got to think about spending some money. I mean, right now, this is another problem with Minnesota, and this is why the fans are not happy about this team. They are just not even spending money, not even trying to get some players that can potentially improving the team. And as a Quakes fan, knowing that that is kind of something the Quakes had done in the past, let me just tell you, it is very infuriating. And I definitely feel all the sympathy of Minnesota fan being frustrated about their owners and their GM not willing to spend the cash. But really, they got to do it. Like every other team in MLS, well, most MLS team in MLS has started to spend the money and started to get some players because they know MLS is on the ups, and that, as the old saying said, MLS is kind of like approaching the 3.0 kind of stage, and you know, if the ownership of Minnesota continue to act like this, they're just gonna stuck at 1.0. And if you're stuck at 1.0 in a stage where MLS is at 3.0, you are gonna left behind. So I'm really hoping that the ownership can finally splash the cash and finally spend some money. I mean, it's not like they don't have any money. They do have a lot of money. I mean, they just traded away Christian Ramirez for some cash, which I know that a lot of Minnesota fan was absolutely fuming about that, and I think that should be another thing that I want to add into the what went wrong this season. You know, trading away Christian Ramirez, that is just insane. Like, why would they decided to trade away pretty much what the Minnesota is all about, and pretty much just captain Minnesota? I mean, he's been there since the birth of this team when they were still in NASL, and yet somehow they trade him away even though they didn't have to do it. So yeah, I mean, that is pretty much it for my moving forward series on Minnesota. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this, and if you're a Minnesota fan, you can leave a comment below of what do you think about this video. Did I get some of the facts wrong, or do you like some of the things that I said? So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I, of course, will be doing the Houston Dynamo in the moving forward series next. And yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.